Welcome to the storeroom here at Fort Dobbs. The storeroom would have been a very important room inside the fort in the lives of the men stationed here. This storeroom would have been a place that they could store tools and equipment used to build the fort, extra supplies such as extra uniforms, extra muskets, ammunition would have been stored in this room as well. Another important thing that would have been stored here would have been part of the soldiers' food. You can see these barrels here beside of me. These would have been packed full of tons of rice and flour, dried peas, those sorts of things. There's also a cellar, we know, dug under the eastern half of the building that provides cool food storage for items like salt pork that would have been packed in barrels like these. And the salt helping to preserve the meat and without refrigeration. The cellar giving a cool place to store that food. We also know from the archaeology done here about 50 years ago, they found quite a few cow and pig bones that had marks or cuts in them that indicated that those animals were butchered here at the fort. So at times the soldiers are receiving fresh meat that's brought up here in the form of cattle and pigs and butchered here at the fort. We know also from the archaeology they found some deer bones, wild game bones. So at times they're relying on wild game for food as well. The soldiers here at Fort Dobbs also would have likely grown gardens, which is very typical in this period at forts. The soldiers would be allowed to grow gardens to provide some of their own food. That obviously would provide fresh vegetables into their diet here. Also, the local farmers in this area could have come and sold food to the soldiers here. There was also a grist mill located just a few miles from the fort that would have provided a place to purchase flour and grain for these soldiers. Each day, each soldier is typically issued about a pound of meat. Again, most of the time that's probably going to be in the form of salted pork. As we discussed, other times that may be fresh meat. Each soldier each day is typically also given about a pound of bread. If they don't have the bread, then the flour or cornmeal could be issued. They could have also constructed clay baking ovens outside of the fort here to provide that fresh bread for the soldiers. Along with the meat and the bread, they would be given several ounces of either rice, dried peas, those sorts of things. Those items, particularly the rice coming from the eastern half of the colony where it has grown down along the coast. Those items shipped up here again in these barrels and stored in the storeroom here. The soldiers at Fort Dobbs here are going to be organized into small groups. About 5 to 6 soldiers, and the period is known as a mess of soldiers. Those 5 to 6 soldiers would come to the storeroom here. They would be issued their rations together. They take it over into the barrack room that they share together. And those rations could be pulled together, and then the jobs of cooking and firewood collecting, those sorts of things, could be divvied up by the men themselves among their small group of soldiers. And each day they would cook the food for themselves as that small group of soldiers. So in our next video, we're going to go across the hall here into our barrack room. We're going to start a fire, and we are going to cook some of the typical soldiers' rations that will be given to the soldiers here, and we'll show you what a typical meal at the fort would have looked like for these soldiers.